doing the second week. The way we're doing this, if you weren't here last week we had three guys up here talking about leading in worship. This week we're going to talk about leading in the church. And then next week we're going to talk about leading in the family. And so I thought it was good last week. I had some good feedback. I thought it was fun and a little bit different, having a panel kind of discussion and to talk about some things. I think the best way to learn about roles is to know people who do them. And so we got people who serve in roles, which is really good. And so we're going to talk about today, Steve's going to talk a little bit about serving as an elder and what that means, how to do that well. And so is Pat's going to talk about leading as a deacon. I'm going to talk a little bit towards the end about serving as a minister, a preacher. So that's about all I got. I'll turn it over to Steve.
If you have your Bibles, I'm sure you do, Bible class, so turn to Acts chapter 20. Acts chapter 20, verse 28. A lot of different ways that we could go with this, but I decided just to look at several texts and look at some of the Greek words that are there in reference to the definition. Elders, of course, the idea was God's, and we find that Paul and Barnabas and others were really involved in appointing elders and congregations that they established. And then we have a few examples of discussions and that type of thing among the elders or with them that gives us some ideas as to the exact role. And then, of course, in Timothy and Titus, we have the qualifications of elders. And in those qualifications also, we get some indications, at least, to the role or to their duty. So we start with Acts chapter 20, verse 28. And, of course, Paul here was talking to the elders from the Ephesian congregation. They made a trip to meet him. He was on his way to Jerusalem. And we have quite a lengthy discussion there in reference to Paul's admonition and his warning to them. In Acts 20:28, talking to this group of elders, he says, "Take heed to yourselves and to all the flock, among which the Holy Ghost has made you overseers, to shepherd the church of God which he purchased with his own blood." The words of interest there are overseers and shepherds. Now, depending on which translation you're using, you may have a little bit of a different word. But the word overseer basically is the idea of seeing that others do the job rightly. The function of the elders, to the best of their ability, is to have teachers and a preacher, others in different roles, to do the things that God commands us to do. And basically the elders have a responsibility of basically overseeing that to the very best of their abilities. And when you look at the congregation's response to that, hopefully we understand what's going on. And we also understand that that is a process that kind of goes on behind the scenes. And is sometimes challenging to try to have the best people or those that are willing to teach and to preach and to conduct the different things that basically keeps us going. The word shepherd that is used there, I think it is maybe the best word to describe the duties of the elders to the congregation. You probably are well aware of the fact that Jesus uses this illustration of the sheep, goats, the shepherd quite often. And it was something that people in the first century had a really good understanding and knowledge of. And they could appreciate how that the shepherds would protect. Matthew had a lesson the other day with that sheepfold and one door going in. The shepherd would sleep in that door. But the shepherd was responsible for all of the well-being of the sheep. If they got cut or had a broken bone, then they basically were a doctor. They would check the sheep for insects and problems there. They would protect them from the wolves or the other individuals that might want to take advantage of the sheep or kill the sheep. In fact, here in this particular text, if you look on down to verse 31 in Acts 20, he says, "Therefore watch and remember." And he warned the elders in Ephesus that even from among themselves there would be those that would go astray. And I think in using this idea of the predator, the wolf, those folks really could appreciate that. They knew that they would completely destroy the flock if they were allowed to get a hold of the sheep, if the shepherd was not there to protect them and to secure them somewhere, especially at night. So you look at that idea of shepherd and you think of elders, I think it helps us to understand what their duties are. Now, that is not always an easy thing. I grew up on a farm, and maybe some of you did as well. And when you would try to doctor or to vaccinate, those animals didn't appreciate that very much. They would kick and run and get away and all sorts of things. Well, sometimes in dealing with people, it's not that easy either. Most of us do not take admonitions or corrections as maybe as good as we ought, but that is the responsibility of the elders to try to do that. Then we move to 1 Timothy chapter 3. In 1 Timothy chapter 3, this is one of those lists of qualifications. And he says, one who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. And you look on down into verse 5, he says, for if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how can he take care of the church of God? So this idea of rule from the original Greek means to stand before, to be over, to superintend, to preside. So it's very closely connected with that idea of being an overseer. And so elders, in a sense, stand before the church, trying to be good examples, realizing that they're obviously not perfect in any way, but to try to stand as examples and also to teach and to try to always keep a watch on those things that are being taught and those things that are done. The word rule here is not used in the sense of, domineering. You remember that Peter, in talking about elders, he warned against, elders sort of trying to rule per se with an iron fist or whatever, if I put that in my words. And that's not what it's all about. If elders are what they ought to be, they're doing what they are doing because they love folks. And because they want to go to heaven and they want everybody else to go to heaven as well. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 12, Paul says, and we urge you, brethren, to recognize those who labor among you and are over you in the Lord and admonish you. Well, again, you have that idea of ruling or admonishing. And the responsibility is to see that is done. Elders may not do that themselves, but they work through the preacher and teachers in understanding that is a duty and a responsibility that they have. And then a final passage in Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 17. Obey those who rule over you and be submissive, for they watch out for your souls as those who must give account. I think this passage obviously is to not the elders so much as it is to the congregation. And talking about the need for us to respect elders, even if we disagree with decisions. And along that line, basically elders serve in those areas of expediency. We have the book, we have the Bible, we have God's Word. Elders have no right nor authority to alter that or to dismiss it or to change it in any way. So basically, elders are working in an area of expediency. And so when we're talking about ruling and giving an account, elders must be very conscious of the fact that God is watching. And any decision that you make needs to be made in accordance to what the Bible actually says, to make sure that a decision that's made does not violate that, and recognize that we are accountable to God for those particular things that are done. Also, there, in reference to authority, an elder really has no authority. An eldership has authority, if that makes sense. There's not a pastor system, as you see in most denominational churches, in reference to the way things are done and the way the things that are conducted. The term pastor, elder, they're all used in the plural when talking about elders from Ephesus or wherever they may be. So the authority is only in those areas of expediency, and it is in the group, whether it's 2 or 4 or 5 or 3, as we have here. Also, going back just a moment to, one other passage I did want to mention, Titus chapter 1. Again, the qualifications that are given there. Titus 1 verse 7 says, "For a bishop must be blameless as a steward of God." I think, the original word there in reference to steward is administrator. To be accountable for the things that you are put in charge of. So that idea of stewardship, we use that quite a lot, particularly with the deacons and in other areas as well. But it also applies to elders. And what I meant to go to a moment ago, back in Acts 20:28, it says, "Therefore take heed to yourselves." So Paul admonishes the elders at Ephesus to really look to the attitude that they were having, that they were not to lord it over the flock, as Peter points out. They're to lead, they're to give good examples for others to follow. In 2 Corinthians 13 and verse 5, we find that Paul tells the members in Corinth to examine themselves to see whether they be in the faith. Well, that same idea is there as well. One final point about expediency. We're told that to go into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. Well, that's the law. That's the standard. Elders would come into that picture in reference to how we go. Being, or what mission efforts we would try to take care of. Who does the preaching, what we do in our community. So, to go is by the authority of God through the Scriptures. Elders would deal with the how of that.
Get this down. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Being a deacon. From my early childhood, I was blessed to be in a congregation into my adult years that had elders and deacons. And one of the things that I was taught, not necessarily from the Bible, was if you ever aspired to be an elder, you should also aspire to be a deacon. And that's part of the reason I'm here today. Unfortunately, as time went on, I went to congregations that did not have leadership, as that was set up in the Bible, having elders and deacons. So I missed a lot of training for many years till I come here. And one of the basic words to go with deacon will be that of a servant. And to serve the congregation is an honor. But as we sung that song a while ago, to the work, we are servants of God. What is the difference between your service to God and my service to the congregation as a deacon? I submit to you there's not much, because who are we serving? You know, as Brother Tom, he grows tomatoes. And as you know, I grow potatoes. They sound a lot alike. But I can't take my potato plow over to Brother Tom and pick his tomatoes. It just won't work with Tom. So therefore, we are each a specialized tool in the Lord's toolbox to serve our fellow man in the community, to serve our fellow members here in this congregation. What Jeff can do is different than what Brother Sonny can do. So the deacons serve as a liaison in a sort of way between the vast majority of the congregation to find out what each particular tool we may have. Got an engineering problem? We go to Brother John over here. Medical problem? Well, I got some medical history and fire cabinet. So we can each learn from each other and be able to take what the elders direct to the congregation, and then what the congregation needs back to the elders to help lessen the load on their shoulders. So let me tell you something. It's a diverse place when you have Pikeville, Spring City, and Dayton under your authority. District makes a big difference, don't it, Steve? So that's one reason we have the deacons, to be able to reach out to these different communities, to be able to know what the needs are, and to know what each member is capable of, to where when something arises we need, we need some nice woodwork done. Brother Charlie is our go-to man for good woodworking. Each one has a special place. Now, where does that come into some of your abilities? Sister Sandra, beautician, what can she do to serve the Lord? Well, we got Brother Daniels over here with a passel of kids. You think you might need somebody to teach him how, or his wife to cut hair? Think you do it? Okay. So just look at the help in life is part of the duties of the congregation to serve. One of the things that the requirements in Timothy's list is for deacons to be tested. How do you test a deacon? How do you test them? You put them to work. Tommy goes gets a new tractor, but in the field, he's going to make sure it do what he needs. You know, a 300 horsepower behemoth can't do what a 20 horsepower garden tractor does in the tomato patch. So each tool has to be fitted for the service. The elders have charged me with one that they thought would be very easy for them. To find out how to encourage, figure out how to do things to encourage the congregation. That's a test that I'm out of my comfort zone with. And I'm like, okay, how's that done? I don't have the examples from years past really to go back to and learn. So I'm having to learn as we go shooting from the hip and communicating with other deacons from other places. I won't just throw it out there for an ideal that we may try sometime. I've talked to a couple about it. We've all read that book, or seen the book, Chicken Soup for the Soul. How about chicken soup for the community? What are we talking about? We got ladies that know how to cook. We got about everybody cook a little chicken soup. Some Saturday, advertising, free chicken soup. And as we, bring the pots of chicken soup in, invite the community in, we sit down across the table from our visitors, eating chicken soup, talking with our community, getting to know our community, and being able to offer Bible study, friendship, and church growth in the ultimate need. And here's the thing, deacons ain't the full thing of it. We have to have something to work with. So if you have ideals that would help in this regard, talk to them. Communication is paramount in any of the jobs or positions that are held within the church. If we don't communicate, we become a space taker, not a space changer. We don't need space takers sitting in the pews. We need space changers working for the glory of God. Did we sing the song in truth and understanding? Or do we just mouth the words, hoping somebody else is going to do it? It's an awesome privilege to be a Christian. Because none of us have to pay that price that Jesus paid for us. Anybody got any questions for me as a deacon, as a servant? How can I help you serve our Lord? And that's the bottom line. Make sure you'll get about 15 out of it.
Are you done?
I'm done.
Okay.
My voice is going.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks for talking, Pat, even though he wasn't your voice. Pat texted me, 2 days ago, and he's like, I'm losing my voice. I said, oh no. So, oh man. But, so I'm kind of the odd one out up here, I guess. We got elders and deacons, and what you see is that they're both roles that are given, specific offices within the church. What you don't see, though, is that the role of a preacher is necessarily the same type of office as those two. And so it's often, I think, there's some confusion, and even people who may know better, and there's some have good intentions, I think there's some confusion that goes around about what exactly is a preacher, and what do they do, and what do they not do. So what I'm gonna do is look at some what it is and what it isn't, what a preacher is and what a preacher isn't. So what a preacher is not is a pastor, and I think that's really important. And you look at a lot of the different denominational structures around the world. Different churches have lots of titles and things that they like to give. We don't go by those titles because words have meanings, and so I don't. Sometimes people may call me a pastor, and they do pretty frequently, but I'm not a pastor. And Steve talked about what a pastor is. The word pastor and shepherd are the same word in Greek. The word pastor refers to the office of an elder. It refers to a specific role, specific qualifications. And I don't meet those qualifications. Some of the qualifications of an elder in 1 Timothy and Titus are, have faithful children and various other things like that. Tomorrow I may have a kid, I guess, but as of right now, I don't have a kid, and they're far from being mature. And so that's an office that I just don't qualify for. And so I don't fill that office. And so a lot of the roles that preachers fill is to some outsiders attribute. Some of the roles outsiders may attribute to preachers are not the actual role that a preacher should have. And so the pastor system is not a biblical system. You shouldn't have one man making a decision for the entire church. You shouldn't have one person with all the authority. That's why God gave elderships and a plurality of men who help guide and lead the church. And so I'm not a pastor, and I'm not the final authority on anything. And I think that's something that I think a lot of people may struggle with, probably because you see me up front a lot. And I think that's where a lot of it comes from. It's not a separate class. And I think this one's important too. When you look at the Bible, you don't see a distinction between clergy and laity. And I think that's something that a lot of our denominational friends out there also get confused, and also perhaps don't do what's right in. Look at 1 Peter, rather. 1 Peter chapter 2. Let me pull it up. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 9 through 10. Peter's talking to a church here, and he says, "You are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but you have received mercy." And so I think there's an important distinction in realizing that I'm not different from you, and I'm not a clergy member. I'm a Christian. And you're not laity, you're a Christian. And so we both have the same obligation towards God. We both have the same responsibility towards in being holy, in being righteous, in serving, in doing God's work, as I have, as you have. There are some who are called to special service. Those would be the elders and the deacons. They're called to high standards. There's high standards to how to become one. But I'm not one of those, and most of you aren't either. So I think what a preacher is not is it's not a pastor, and I think that's a distinction that a lot of the world has missed. So what then is a preacher? Look in your Bibles. Look at 2 Timothy chapter 4. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, Timothy is a preacher. He's one of Paul's companions. Paul sends him to Ephesus to work with the church down in Ephesus after Paul has left. And Timothy's got a lot of challenges that he butts up against. There's people that don't give him the respect that he needs. There's people that are digging in their heels and stubborn. And so Timothy is trying to help teach and teach this church at Ephesus and work with them and minister to them. And so Paul gives a lot of instruction to Timothy. Some of it is talking about elders and deacons. But again, Timothy is not one of those. Timothy is just a local evangelist. And so Paul also gives instructions for how Timothy should act. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1 and following, he says, "I charge you in the presence of God and of Christ Jesus, who is judge of the living and the dead, and by his appearing and his kingdom, to preach the word. Be ready in season and out of season, reprove, rebuke, and exhort with complete patience and teaching. For the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but have itching ears, and they will accumulate for themselves teachers who suit their own passions. And I'll turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into myths. As for you, always be sober-minded, enduring, suffering, doing the work of an evangelist. Fulfill your ministry." And so you have some pretty powerful reminder for Timothy. Paul says, listen, your job is to preach. Your job is to teach. And your preaching and your teaching is evangelism. And the word evangelism, that's kind of a strange word. We have the word gospel and we have the word evangelism, and they look nothing alike in English, but they're the same word in Greek. And so, gospelize people, I guess. Give people the gospel. Teach people about Christ. And so that's the role that Timothy has to fill. And that is his ministry. His ministry is to teach. It's to bring others to a more complete knowledge and maturity of God and his word, and to encourage people as they go about that path. And so the role of a preacher, the job of a preacher, is to preach. is to teach. And so, what do I do most of my week? Most of my week I spend reading books and studying and preparing lessons. And for those of you guys who have done some of that, it takes a long time. It takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of study. And so the majority of my job is to teach and to preach. And that's a very big responsibility. James says, not many of you should be teachers because what? You receive a stricter judgment. And that's a terrifying verse. It just is. Because as a teacher, you're not responsible only for yourself, but you're responsible for the message that you're giving other people. And what you want to avoid at all costs is being a false teacher and teaching things that are not true. And so there's a big responsibility there. But I think we should also note that my responsibility as a preacher is not all that different from your responsibility as a Christian. Now, I'm hired to preach, and I do that. And there's other things that I do. I do visiting, and I write a lot of cards and a lot of those type things. But I do that not because that's necessarily the role of a preacher, but because that's the role of a Christian. And as Christians, we should all be doing that. We should all be serving. We should all be helping others. I'm fortunate enough that I'm in a position where that's my job, and I get to do it during work hours, and that's a good thing. And preaching's, there's nothing else I'd rather do. But for all Christians, we all have responsibilities to build up. We all have responsibility to edify. We all have responsibilities to serve. We all have responsibilities to teach and to grow in our understanding. One of the things that the Hebrew writer says, as he is kind of given a scathing condemnation of his audience, they've not spiritually matured, and he says to them, by this time many of you should be teachers, but you're not. And you're needing the first elementary principles, or the first principles, or something along those lines. You're needing the milk when you should be needing the meat. And so one of the condemnations of the church that he's talking to, his audience, is you guys need to be growing spiritually. And you need to be at a point where you can help others grow and mature. But you're not. And so the role of a preacher is really not all that different than the role of the average person. Sure, I get to go up and preach on Sunday and be seen up front. But that's not why I preach. And that's not why I serve. I serve because I'm a Christian. And you are Christians too. And so we all have an obligation to serve and to do what's right, and to submit ourselves to the authority of the elders, to help deacons in their work, and to be a part of God's congregation, reaching the community. We're all God's holy nation. It's a royal priesthood. We all have roles to play in His church. Any thoughts? We got about 5 minutes, I guess. That's all I had prepared. It's hard judging because some people go longer, some people don't. So I had my a little bit short. I thought one of these guys. You get an old preacher and an older preacher, and you get a Pat up here. I was lucky to get a word in. Somebody have a hand up.
Yeah. You used the word clergy before, and I'm curious, is that the whole eldership and preacher and deacons, or is that a word that we should not really be using as Christians in this church?
Yeah, well, I think I don't know that I would call them eldership and the deacons clergy. I think clergy is literally is a loaded term. When people hear the word clergy, they think like Roman Catholic priesthood versus your common people. We're all Christians, and so we're all on the same plane.
Is the word clergy found in the Bible anywhere?
That's a good question. I bet the root probably is, but I'm not sure off the top of my head. I don't think so, though.
From the legal aspect, going into hospitals and stuff, they have what they call clergy. Anyone who represents religious belief is a member of the clergy, and legal aspect of all of it stuff. That would include anybody.
Right.
That's a Christian.
So that would include evangelists as well?
Yeah. Any other thoughts, comments?
What do y'all want from us? I know that in and of itself is a loaded question, but maybe if you had like number one, what does each of you guys want from us as the general congregation?
I've answered you guys.
Well, the words that I talked about, in each of those things that the elders are supposed to fulfill the roles, of course, you can't lead if people won't follow. All you can do is same in Matthew's position. You can stand up here and preach the word, but it's up to us in the pew to listen and apply. We pray that lots of times that we'll do that. But, I think from an elder standpoint, what you hope is that people would look at these duties and realize the weight. As Matthew pointed out, there's a tougher or a greater judgment, and there in Hebrews chapter 13 where it talks about watching out for the souls. I think from an elder standpoint, you just like for folks to try to understand that, and when decisions are made, it might not be exactly what you want, to realize that it is a decision, and elders are in a position to have to make that, and sometimes they may not even like it, but a decision has to be made. From an elder standpoint, you just like as much understanding, maybe sympathy sometimes too.
I would say initiative. Don't wait for someone else to handle a problem. If you see a problem, take care of it. If you see a need, meet it. We're all workers. We're all working on the same goal. We're all working on the same team. I think there's sometimes unnecessary competition. I think we just all need to be doing. We all need to be about the Father's business, right? Yeah.
So would you all consider the want for us to become the salt?
Become the salt.
To become the salt?
Yeah.
I mean, would that be kind of all-encompassing for us?
Yeah.
To be the best flavorful salt, would that be?
Yeah. Be the salt of the earth, go out of the world. Okay. Thank you, guys.